Alrighty, welcome back in everyone to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I am your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, August 18th. We are 5 days out from college football being a thing. I am outright giddy, and I am not usually giddy, but we are 5 days out from college football being back in our lives, and that's a beautiful thing. So, we got some playoff predictions to make, and we'll start talking about the group of 5. I'll give you 11 teams that I'm looking at. We'll do one dark horse and then the top 10 as I see it going into this year for the group of 5 teams that could possibly make the playoff. We'll do a little quick run through of these teams, some really interesting teams in a group of 5 that I think is going to be a little bit of a nightmare to figure out by the end of the season. Then we'll get into all my national award picks. We'll get into the Heisman. We'll talk about the Biletnikoff, the Doak Walker, the Davey O'Brien, all the big-time awards at the end of the season. I'll give my picks for those. Always kind of a crapshoot, but at the end of the day, always fun to do, especially with the Heisman Trophy that I think is going to be pretty interesting this year. And then we'll get to my final CFP predictions. I don't feel confident. I'll just be totally honest with you. I don't think anyone feels confident right about now making CFP predictions because I can almost promise this year is going to be absolutely off the walls when it comes to college football. So I got my 12. I feel about as confident as I'm going to feel about them, as the way I'll put it right now. But let's go ahead and jump into these group of 5 contenders, because I think there's a lot of really interesting teams at the group of 5 level this year, and I think there's a number of ones to watch. I'll start with the dark horse, and then I'll get into the top 10 as I see it. Obviously, there's a little bit of wiggle room here, and there will be a lot of variation in the group of 5 level this year, but the way I see it, we'll start with the dark horse here. Florida Atlantic is a really interesting team to watch going into this year. I love Caden Veltkamp coming over from Western Kentucky, as is Easton Messer, a very good wide receiver for them that's going to fit in great. I love Zach Kittley. I think it's a fantastic hire for FAU. Just got rid of Tom Herman, brought in Zach Kittley from Texas Tech to be their new head coach, was the offensive coordinator over there. I think him and Caden Veltkamp fit together perfectly. I think it's going to be a really, really fun offense to watch. The defense, a little bit more of a question mark, no doubt about it, and they have a big-time fight for them in their conference, but I really like the duo of quarterback and head coach. I really think it's going to work out very well. I think Easton Messer is going to be a big-time player, and I wouldn't be surprised if late on in the season FAU was firmly in the CFP conversations. Into my top 10 now, I'll start with the Army Black Knights. This is going to be a good team. Now, you do lose Bryson Daly. That is a huge loss for a team, obviously, that is quarterback-led, but Dwayne Coleman is going to be the starter there. Very talented kid. Absolutely someone that can run this offense very effectively. As long as Jeff Monken's the head coach, frankly, I think they're going to be a really good football team. I think you're going to have a hard time getting me to believe that this is not going to be a good team. Noah Short is going to take over in a large part for Kanye Udo, who moved on to Arizona State. Elo Mendoza moved on to Georgia. I still think this is going to be a good team. I think they're going to be very, very solid. I don't know if they quite come to the level that they were last year, but I think it's going to be a really fun team, and I think that Army-Navy game for a second year in a row is going to be a very fun one at the end of the season. Then I got Liberty here at 9. Liberty replaces Caden Salter with Ethan Vasco coming over from Coastal Carolina. Very talented kid, absolutely someone that could hit that next level at Liberty, especially in a conference where Liberty really does set the pace. Western Kentucky is a very interesting team this year, but I think Liberty is still the team to beat in the Conference USA. They also bring in Casey Kane, who is a very interesting receiver from UNLV, started his career at Texas, and is a very long, athletic kid, absolutely someone that could have a big-time year. And Liberty, as we all know, has a very manageable schedule pretty much every single year. I think Liberty is going to be very firmly in the CFP conversations. Might go undefeated, definitely a little bit of a tougher road, but we'll see what happens with Liberty, especially replacing someone like Caden Salter. Then I got South Florida here at number 8. I think this is a bounce-back team in 2025. Everyone was on this team last year, thought they were going to be able to make a big-time run at the CFP. It never really came together, and some of that was injury, some of that was just not playing to their potential, but Byron Brown is back, very talented quarterback that's a dual threat. Jaden Alexis is a very fun receiver that absolutely will play a big role. Chaz Nimrod is coming over from Tennessee. Tyler Williams from Minnesota started his career at Georgia. It's a very talented wide receiver core, and I think if they can put it all together, Alex Golish, obviously a very, very good head coach. I think we might have just been a year early on the Bulls, and they very well could put together a very nice year. Start with a couple of tough games, but I do think this is a team that could do some really, really good things in the AAC this year, or in the American this year, excuse me. Then you got Memphis. I think Memphis at number 7. This is transfer central. There are so many transfers on this team. There will probably be about 9 or 10 transfers on both sides starting for this team. it's going to be all over the place. Now, I do love a lot of the transfers they brought in. Love Brendan Lewis coming in from Nevada. Very athletic guy that is going to start for them. Rossier is going to be a very good player for probably a third year in a row, I think, here. They have a very good running game. I think it's going to be a very good team. I do have some questions about all the transfers coming in, but from a pure talent level, this is right up there with some of the best rosters in the group of five. UNLV, right up there as well when it comes to a talent, and a lot of transfers coming into this team as well. But Dan Mullen returns to college football. It's a very interesting team. Anthony Coulanger and Alex Orji are still going through that battle. I tend to believe Anthony Coulanger is going to be the go-to guy. I think it's going to be really hard to not have a package for Alex Orji in some form or capacity this season. They play this Saturday. They get Idaho State, a okay FCS team, not a great FCS team by any means, so they should be able to handle business there. They are loaded with former Power 5 guys, whether it's Troy O'Meary coming from Arizona State, JoJo Earle coming from TCU, and before that, Alabama. Denver Harris was a 5-star coming out of high school at cornerback that's going to be playing there. And then Chief Borders coming over from Nebraska. A lot of elite talent on this team. If Dan Mullen can put it together, I think this is going to be a really awesome team. Now, a lot of moving parts, a lot of things that need to change after a very interesting year for UNLV a year ago, but I do think this is a very talented team, and I think Dan Mullen always has an ability to make an offense work. It'll be a really, really fun year over there in Las Vegas. My number 5 is Toledo. It is a very, very good football team. The Toledo Rockets are definitely for real. Tucker Gleason coming off a really solid year a year ago. Junior Vandross is someone I really love on the outside for them, coming back for another year. And then Chip Trainum comes in from Kentucky. He was at Ohio State in his first couple of years. Very, very talented kid. Just didn't quite find his groove at Kentucky for a number of different reasons. They return a ton on defense as well. I think there's going to be the best team in the MAC going into the year. Probably will be the best team coming out of the year, and we'll see if that's good enough to get him into the CFP. The MAC is always a little bit all over the place, so we'll see how that unfolds, but I love the Toledo Rockets heading into this year. Number 4 is JMU. This is a very good football team. Another quarterback battle that is still going on. Alonzo Barnett takes on Matthew Sluka, a name that a lot of people might have forgotten, but the UNLV quarterback that sat out the back half of the season, he has found his way to JMU. Barnett's still coming back from an injury, so there's still some questions there. I think they're going to play both guys. I really do, especially early on. I think it's going to be really hard for someone to separate until they see him on the football field. Isaiah Alston comes in as a wide receiver from Iowa State. Really talented kid. Never caught on at Iowa State for a number of reasons, mainly because the two guys in front of him were downright incredible, but at the end of the day, I think he's ready to explode at JMU. They get Louisville in week 2, so we'll know a lot about this team pretty early on. I think they can make a run. There's no doubt about it. These top 4 teams in my mind, or top 5 teams really, going to Toledo, I think those are going to be one of the 5 teams you see in the CFP. I think they are really, really solid teams, and in the Sun Belt, this is absolutely the team to beat this year. Navy, really good football team. They bring back Blake Horvath, who is one of the best quarterbacks in the entire country when it comes to running his offense. There's very few that have a better grasp on it than him. They also bring back Alex Teska as well as Eli Heidenreich at running back. Alex Teska, a little bit more of that fullback build or a B-back, depending on the way you kind of break down your triple option offense. Also, the defensive talent is very good. Andrew Duhart is going to be an NFL player at corner. Very talented team that obviously has a lot of veteran players on that squad. It is going to be a very good team again. I think I wouldn't be surprised at all if they were 8-0 again going into that Notre Dame matchup. Hopefully they'll fare a little bit better this time around, but I do think this is going to be a team that we're talking about deep into the season. Boise State is going to be in this conversation. Obviously, Ashton Jeanty is gone. I think they're going to be more than fine. I love Chris Marshall coming back. I love Latrell Caples on the outside as well. I think Jaden Virgin-Morgan is going to be one of the very best players in the entire group of 5, frankly. And Maddox Matson didn't play great football last year, but played really better, much better football towards the end of last year, especially when teams started to key in on Ashton Jeanty. I think he's going to take another step forward. I don't think the run game is going to take a massive step back. I think it definitely will take a step back. It's going to be hard not to, but I do think the pass game will take a step forward. So I think there's still going to be a team that is firmly in the conversation, probably will win the Mountain West, is definitely the favorite right now over there, and will have everything to say to possibly go to back-to-back CFPs. But I'm going to go with Tulane as my number 1 team. I think they make it this year. I think there is going to be chaos all over the place. When you talk about a group of 5 team, I think there's going to probably be a 2-loss group of 5 team in the CFP. I think this team might have 2 losses to Power 5 teams, and I think they might have a Power 5 win. Probably going to need one of those Power 5 wins between Northwestern, Duke, and Ole Miss in the early parts of the season. If they're going to move forward, they get Northwestern and Duke at home. So they have the ability to absolutely do this. I think a 10-2 Tulane team would get in. I think they're going to end 10-2. So I'm going to lean towards Tulane in this one. We'll get into the rest of my picks towards the end of the show, but as of right now, I have my group of 5 team locked in. It is going to be the Tulane Green Wave. I just think that quarterback situation, although a little bit crazy, has enough talent and has enough ability to really get them over the edge. I think Shaz Preston's going to be an incredible player, and they return a ton on defense that is going to make big-time plays for them this year. So the group of 5 is going to be really fun. I don't think there's going to be a team that outright takes away with this thing, kind of like last year. Even going into the last couple of weeks, UNLV had an ability to beat Boise State, get to the Mountain West Championship, and then win again and possibly find their way to the CFP. So it's still going to be very much up in the air into Week 11, Week 12, Week 13, but someone's going to have to separate. I think it'll be Tulane at the end of the day. I think it could be JMU, Toledo, Boise State, any of these teams. Navy absolutely has an ability to do this. I just tend to believe Tulane's going to be able to find their groove. I think Jake Retzlaff is going to take over at some point for their starting quarterback, and I think he's going to have an incredible year. So I'm going to go with Tulane to have a big-time year. I'm going to take them to be the CFP team out of the group of 5 in a weird group of 5 in 2025. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we got national awards to pick. We got the Joe Moore Award, Jim Thorpe, Butt Kiss, all of the great awards that go out at the end of the year. We're going to break them all down, and at the very end of it, I will give my Heisman pick for this year that I think is going to be a little bit all over the place. But we'll talk about it right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the big-time contenders from the group of 5 level. I think it's going to be Tulane, Boise State, Navy, JMU, and Toledo. I think those are going to be the teams you're going to really want to watch, along with a number of others that absolutely can make a run at this thing. I think the group of 5 is going to be all over the place, the same way the Power 5 is going to be all over the place, and that will play into these national awards. There's no doubt about it. We will get to the Heisman at the very end of this, but wanted to get into all the national awards that we have to give out this year. There is a whole lot of really tough races in this thing. I think there's a lot of new players that could step up into big-time roles this year. There's a lot of veterans that could finally get the recognition that they're looking for on the national stage in these national awards. We'll start with the Joe Moore Award that goes to the best offensive line in the country. I think it's going to be the Alabama Crimson Tide. I think this group is absolutely incredible. Caden Proctor is one of the best, maybe the best offensive tackle in the entire country. Cam Dewberry comes over from A&M, is going to be a force in the run game. I can almost promise you that. Parker Brailsford, one of the best, maybe the best center in the entire country as well. Jaden Roberts has had a couple of injury things early on in fall camp. It sounds like they're playing very aggressive in those scrimmages right now, but Jaden Roberts is going to be the guard for the majority of the season, I would have to imagine. I think he's an absolute incredible player, right on par with a Cam Dewberry or really any other guard you're going to find in this conference. And then Wilkin Formby takes over at the right tackle position. We'll see how that develops. That's absolutely someone of a question, quote-unquote, going into the year. I think they're going to be more than fine. Obviously, losing Jamarian Miller this past weekend, we'll talk about that a little bit more on Wednesday, but this is absolutely a player that's going to affect this. I think the run game's still going to be really good. I think Daniel Hill's going to be a great player. I think Richard Young finally takes that little bit of step forward that Alabama fans have been kind of waiting for a little bit from number 9. I think this offensive line is going to be incredible. I really do think it's the best unit in the country. I think A&M comes really close to this unit in terms of how good they are, and Cam Dewberry being a part of both groups at certain parts last year is really interesting, but I do think Alabama is going to be the best group in the country. I think they're led by the best tackle in the country in Caden Proctor. Maybe Spencer Fano has him beat, but there's a number of very good players on this offensive line. I think they are a force to deal with. I think they win the Joe Moore Award at the end of the year. Moving forward to the Jim Thorpe Award, I'm going to go a little bit off book here. I'm going to go with KJ Bolden from Georgia. This is a player that I think is going to burst onto the scene this year. If you're a Georgia fan, you know this guy. You do not need to be introduced to KJ Bolden, but I think he's going to be a nightmare this year. And I think when you look at the back end for Georgia, you lose Malachi Starks, obviously a huge player. They're a little bit younger on the back end than they normally are. I think they're the same amount of talented. I think Dalen Everett's one of the best corners in the country. I think Jonel Aguero is going to take a big-time step forward. All that being said, I think this is the most talented player they have on their back end of their defense. I think he's an absolute freak. I think he's going to make so many different plays in pass coverage as well as in the run game, especially in the run game, a very aggressive player, but I think this guy's special, and I think he's going to pick up right where Malachi Starks left off. I think he's going to put together an incredible year and, at the very least, be on the short list for the Jim Thorpe Award. I think he's going to win it. I think he's going to be an incredible player that really rounds into form towards the back half of the season and has an incredible, incredible sophomore campaign. For Butkus Award, it was kind of a layup. I'll be totally honest with you. I'm going with Anthony Hill Jr., the very best linebacker in the country. He's going to play a lot of big-time games. He's going to be in the most talked about conference, whether we like that or not. The SEC is going to be right up there. He's going to have a number of big-time games to really show out his performance. I think he's going to put on crazy numbers. And I think the big thing for him is the pass rush on this Texas team is an absolute nightmare. And we'll talk about that here in a second. But when you have Colin Simmons and Ethan Burke and all of those guys going after the quarterback, this guy's going to be freed up to do a number of different things, including rush the passer, but play a little bit of pass coverage, which he's gotten better and better at throughout his career. Play, obviously, in kind of a hook zone as a spy. He's going to be able to do a number of different things, and I think he's going to be one of the most productive, maybe the most productive defensive player in the entire country. I think he's going to be a force to be reckoned with, and when we look up at the end of the year, there's a number of guys in the linebacker position that you could pick for this award. I'm going to go with the guy that I think is the very best in the country, on the very best defense in the country as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to go with Anthony Hill to win this one. The Doak Walker Award goes to the very best running back in the country. I'm going to go Jeremiah Love. I do think Mekhi Hughes is going to have a very, very good case for this, especially with some of the learning curve, I suppose, that's going to happen with Dante Moore at times up there. Same thing's going to happen here, though. You're going to have a new quarterback, whether that's Kenny Minchie or CJ Carr. We're still trying to figure that out. We'll talk about that on Wednesday as well. But I do think Jeremiah Love is special. I think the biggest thing here is, can he stay on the field for an entire season? If he does that, I think he's going to have an incredible year both on the field and off it. I think he's going to do incredible, incredible things, and he's going to be the guy that just puts up truly insane numbers. The offensive line, although they lost a number of guys, is going to be as good as any in the country. I think this guy's going to be a force. And as long as he is on the field, he's going to put up truly insane numbers. I think he's the guy to watch for the Doak Walker Award. Although there's about a million guys that could find their way to win this thing, I think Jeremiah Love is the one that really stands out. I think he's fully healthy going into this year, and I think he will be fully healthy at the end of the year, which has been a tall order for this guy, but I think he's going to be incredible. I think he wins the Doak Walker Award this year. Davey O'Brien, I'm going to go with Garrett Nussmeier. I think Garrett Nussmeier is going to put on a show this year. I think the defense is going to be much better. There's no doubt about that. I think it's going to take a little bit of time. So I do think he's going to have to put up some really good numbers early on in the season for them to win some of those big-time games. Obviously, the week one against Clemson, but as well as a couple others that they're going to have to face early on in the year. I think they get Florida in week 3, if I'm not mistaken. He's going to have to put up good numbers in those. I think the offensive line will work out. I don't know if it's going to be as elite as it has been the last couple of years. I think they're going to be more than fine there. No doubt about it. And I think Garrett Nussmeier is going to bring home a big-time award here. Now, you'll find that the Davey O'Brien doesn't always translate into winning the Heisman, so that's something to watch here. But at the end of the day, I think Garrett Nussmeier puts together an incredible year, puts up some crazy, crazy numbers for LSU, especially early on in the year. And I think he's the guy that ends up winning the Davey O'Brien at the very end of the year for the best quarterback in the country. The John Mackey Award goes to the best tight end in the country. I'm not going to overthink this one. I'm going to go Eli Stowers. I thought about putting Jack Andrews from Texas over here, the transfer from Cal. Thought about putting Max Clare going to Ohio State from Purdue. I think Eli Stowers is going to be the most important guy on that Vanderbilt offense, and frankly, although I don't think Vanderbilt's going to be all that good this year, I do think they're going to be a team that's at least going to be able to move the ball sort of effectively, and mainly I think he's going to be the absolute go-to guy, bar none. I don't think there's going to be anyone all that close to him, frankly. So I think you're going to be in a position where Eli Stowers is going to take up a big-time part of the target share over there, kind of like a Penn State situation a year ago where they needed Tyler Warren to play really good football if they were going to be effective last year. I think Vanderbilt's the exact same thing with Eli Stowers. I think he puts together a very nice year for Vanderbilt and wins the John Mackey Award, although I don't think Vanderbilt's going to put up too many wins. I think this guy's going to put up some really crazy numbers this upcoming year. Moving on to the Bronco Nagurski Award, goes to the very best defender in the entire country. I think it's going to be Colin Simmons from Texas. I think the edge rusher is going to put up ridiculous numbers. I think he might even put up record-breaking numbers this year. That's how good I think this kid is. I don't think there was a tackle in the country that could really contain him last year. I don't see that being any different this year, especially not having to play in Alabama with a Caden Proctor, being able to go after some lower competition within the SEC, not bad competition by any means, but absolutely a guy that I think is going to explode. I think the big thing to remember here is they're going to throw guys at him. There's no doubt about that. But also, you have Ethan Burke on the other side. You have a very good, very long defender that absolutely can cause his own havoc. I don't think they're going to be able to key in on Colin Simmons. I think they're absolutely going to put most of their energy into stopping him. I don't think they're going to be able to put enough energy into stopping him, and I think he's going to be a force in week one. I think he's going to be a nightmare for Ohio State to deal with, and I don't think he's going to go away for the rest of the year. I think he's going to be a nightmare for every single offense to deal with in the entire country. I think Colin Simmons puts on an absolute show this year. I really do. I think he's a special player going into his sophomore campaign. I think he's one of the best, maybe the very best defender in the entire country. Although Caleb Downs is right up there with him, I think the numbers for Colin Simmons are going to be a little bit more eye-popping at the end of the year. I think he wins the Bronco Nagurski Award. The Biletnikoff, I'm going Jeremiah Smith. And the funny thing here is I don't necessarily think Jeremiah Smith is going to have the best numbers at the very end of the year. I frankly think he probably should have won this award last year, but that's a totally different conversation. I think this guy is going to be uniquely important in a number of different ways. Obviously, he's going to be one of the best wide receivers in the country. I think Carnell Tate and Brandon Ennis are great players. I think it's going to be impossible to not throw this guy the ball almost every single time you have it. I'll just be totally honest. Also, I think people are going to understand the gravity that he takes up. In that Texas game, I can almost promise you he is going to be bracketed by 2 or maybe even 3 guys, depending on the play call and depending on the formation. I think they're going to free up a number of players on the other side. Happened against Texas last year. I think it'll happen again this year. I think it'll happen throughout the year. And so even if Jeremiah Smith, let's say he goes for 1,100 yards, which would actually be a step back from a year ago and doesn't go as crazy as he did a year ago, I think they're going to look around and say, who brings more attention to them? Who opens up the rest of the offense more than this kid? And I think Jeremiah Smith is going to end up being the Biletnikoff winner, even if a Jordan Tyson has more receiving yards, even if a Ryan Wingo has more receiving touchdowns. I think Jeremiah Smith is the most important player maybe in the entire country, and I think he's a guy that when you look up at the end of the year, maybe has not had the statistical year that he had a year ago. He's going to make sure that everyone else around him has better statistical years than they did a year ago, and I think that's going to be a huge part of this conversation by the end of the year. The Broyles Award goes to the very best coordinator in the entire country. I'm going to go with Jason Beck at Utah. He comes over from New Mexico with Devin Dampier. I think this Utah offense is going to be incredible. I really do. I think Wayshawn Parker is an incredibly underrated running back. I think they add a number of big-time players from New Mexico and Ryan Davis on the outside, as well as Tobias Merriweather, who I think was just underutilized at Cal in some respects. I think Jason Beck is going to be incredible this year, and I think he's going to get looks for a head coaching job. I don't know if he'll make that jump right away, but I do think it's going to be a uniquely explosive offense, and I think in the Big 12, where you're going to have a number of really solid, really fun offenses, I still think Utah is going to be the show. I think Utah is going to be the go-to game every single weekend, and I think Jason Beck is going to be the very best offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator in general by the end of the season. I think Utah is going to be incredible offensively. And then Coach of the Year, Washington is my team this year. Washington is the team that I am leaning into, and if I'm picking them to make a big-time run, win 10 games, I got to pick their head coach to win Coach of the Year. Obviously, I'm going to go with Jedd Fisch here, an incredible head coach. And I thought about a number of guys that I think are going to do incredible things. John Sumrall down at Tulane, I think he's going to be incredible. I think Brian Kelly is going to prove a lot of people wrong this year. I think obviously you're going to have Kyle Whittingham in this conversation with what he's going to do over at the Big 12. I think Jedd Fisch is going to win this award. I think the turnover that has happened at Washington over the last couple of years has been not overshadowed by any respect. Obviously, it's been talked about quite a bit. I still think it hasn't been given the proper respect. And I think Damon Williams is going to put together a really, really nice year. I think the defense is going to be really talented on the other side of the ball, even losing a couple of guys this offseason. I think this team is going to be really good. I'm leaning into Washington, which pretty much means I got to pick Jed Fish to be my coach of the year. Really thought about Kalen DeBoer here, but at the end of the day, I'm going to go with the guy that took over for him at his old job, and I'm going to go with Jed Fish to win coach of the year this year. Then we got Heisman Trophy, and I'm going to go with the finalists here first. I'm going to do Jeremiah Love, Cade Klubnik, Garrett Nussmeier, and Jeremiah Smith. I think that those will be the guys representing their teams in New York City. The weird thing is Jeremiah Smith, being on here is a little bit confusing because obviously Julian Saint is going to have a big time year if Jeremiah Smith has a big time year. I think Jeremiah Smith could outshine the quarterback. Now, it's not to say Julian Saint wouldn't deserve to be here, or at least deserve to be in the conversation. Absolutely. If Jeremiah Smith is here, you can bet Julian Saint's probably in the top 10 at the very least of the Heisman voting. I just think when you're talking about the Ohio State football team, you're going to start with number 4, and then you're going to move to the quarterback, and you're going to move to different positions. But I think Jeremiah Smith is going to get all the love in the world. And I think he's one of those unique guys in the wide receiver position, kind of like Ryan Williams this year, that I think is going to be able to outshine his quarterback when he's making big-time plays. People are going to focus on Julian Saint plenty. I think Jeremiah Smith is going to get the majority of the love, and I think he's going to overtake his quarterback in that respect. I don't think he has to have a ridiculous season to do so. I really do think he can do it with a 1,400-yard, 1,300-yard year like he had a year ago. I think he's going to be uniquely impressive, and whether it's, fudging the numbers or people getting a little bit over their skis for maybe the best player in the country, I think Jeremiah Smith finds his way to New York. Cade Klubnik, I think the runway is just incredible. I think when you look at the schedule that he's going to have, obviously the ACC schedule with Clemson is going to be very favorable for this guy, but they also dodged Miami this year. I think this team is in a great position to put up some incredible numbers. I also think the run game is not going to be great. I think they're going to really have to get that going. I think they have some good pieces. I think Adam Randall is going to come into his own in his first full year at running back. I think Gideon Davidson is going to come in as a freshman year and have an incredible year. I still think Cade Klubnik and the wide receiver trio that they have is going to be the most important part of this team. Period. End of story. And I think Cade Klubnik is going to put up some just truly ridiculous numbers at the end of the year. Same thing with Garrett Nussmeier. Love what Caden Durham brings to the table. I still think the pass game is going to have to carry most of the weight offensively, and I think Garrett Nussmeier is more than capable of carrying that weight. I think he puts together an incredible year and finds his way to New York. And then Jeremiah Love. To me, he's one of the most important players in the country to his offense, especially with a new quarterback coming on, whether it's C.J. Carr or Kenny Minchey, maybe even more if it's Kenny Minchey because of the attention that he will take up in the run game. I think Jeremiah Love's going to have a huge year. I think he's going to do incredible things. I think he will stay healthy, which is a little bit of a bet by me, but at the end of the day, I do think Jeremiah Love puts together an incredible year. I think he finds his way to New York City. And I think at the end of the day, when you're talking about, I know I had Garrett Nussmeier winning the Davey O'Brien. I think Cade Klubnik wins the Heisman. It's the weirdest thing in the world that the best quarterback in the country can be given out to one guy, and then another quarterback wins the Heisman. But it happens a lot, and it's weird that it happens a lot, but at the end of the day, I do think it'll happen this year. I think Cade Klubnik wins the Heisman Trophy. I think the schedule sets up incredibly well for him. I think he catches an LSU team at the perfect time before they've really gotten their feet under them defensively. I think he puts together an incredible year. I'm going to take Cade Klubnik to win the Heisman Trophy and then ride off into the sunset. I think he's going to have an incredible year. Garrett Riley, we know, can call an offense, and this is Cade Klubnik's third year really executing that offense. I think he's going to be an incredible player, and I think, obviously, the schedule is going to have quite a bit to do with that. I think he's going to put up crazy, crazy numbers and find his way to a Heisman Trophy at the end of the year. Will he find his way to the CFP? Well, almost definitely he'll find his way to the CFP. Will he find his way to the national title game is the question that all Clemson fans are asking, and we'll get into that right after this. There is a number of picks that I'm questioning in this next segment, but I will get my official CFP picks right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just gave out all my national awards for this upcoming year. I think Texas probably dominates some of those defensive awards, including the Butkus and the Nagurski Award. I think Jeremiah Smith finally gets the Biletnikoff he probably shouldn't have gotten last year. and I'm going to take Kate Klubnik to win the Heisman Trophy this year. I think the schedule sets up incredibly. I think the trio of wide receivers is about as good as you're going to find in the country, and the comfortability in this offense is, again, about as good as you're going to find in the country in a country full of new quarterbacks. But let's get into my CFP predictions. I put it off long enough. I am very nervous about these picks because at the end of the day, I don't think anyone's fully confident in their CFP picks right now. If they tell you they're fully confident, they are lying to you. I'm just going to be plainly honest with you. But at the end of the day, this is the way I see this thing breaking down. I'm going to go Clemson as the number one team in the country, as the undefeated ACC champion. I really do think the schedule sets up incredibly nice for them. I think they run the table. I think they are a 12-0 team at this point, or 13-0 team at this point. I think they get the one seed, much like Oregon did a year ago, and they get a tough matchup against a possible incredible matchup between Georgia and Utah that we'll get to here in a second. My number 2 seed, Alabama. I think they win the SEC. I think they are the number 2 seed in the entire country. I think they're going to have an incredible year. I think so many people are writing off a guy that was in the national championship game not 18 months ago, and Kalen DeBoer, an incredible head coach. I understand the questions around Ty Simpson. I have some of those questions as well. I still think he'll be able to put together an incredible year. I think the wide receiver core is as good as you're going to find in the country. I think the offensive line, the exact same, and the defense, going to be a nightmare and give them a lot of short fields to work with. I think they win the SEC. I think they're the number 2 seed in the country. I think Ohio State fits into the number 3. I think they win the Big Ten this year, but I do think they have a little bit of a rocky road to get there. Now, that Texas game is going to be really interesting because, let's say, Texas were to win that opening week game at Ohio State, but then Ohio State were to run the table and beat Penn State in the Big Ten championship, and then Penn State, let's say they're undefeated at the point of the Big Ten championship game, or I guess that wouldn't make sense. Let's say Ohio State loses to Penn State the first time around, and then they find their way to a rematch, and Ohio State wins that one. Would Texas bump up to the 3 spot? Would Ohio State jump over Texas, who had beaten them earlier in the year? It's a very complicated situation. I'm going to go with Ohio State 3, and then I'm going to go with Penn State 4. The loser of the Big Ten championship, I think they could go into that thing undefeated. I think this team is going to be very, very good this year. I think they're going to miss some of that big-time game stuff that they've missed the past number of years. So I do think there's going to be a little of that missing from Penn State this upcoming year. I still think they're one of the top 4 seeds in the country because I think they might be undefeated going into that Big Ten championship game. The seeding here is going to be really tough. I think by the end of the year, especially if you add a Clemson into this thing, I think the SEC and the Big Ten runner-ups are going to be battling for that 4th spot. I just think Penn State wins out in this one because I don't think they have a regular season loss going into that Big Ten championship, as crazy as that might sound for even some Penn State fans out there, frankly. But I think those are your top 4 seeds. When you get into the 5 seed, I'm going to go with Texas here. They're the runner-up in the SEC championship to me. I think they very well could be one of those top 4 seeds, but I'm going to go with them at the number 5. They're going to face off against Tulane, my number 12 seed. A little bit of complicated seeding here, but at the end of the day, I do think Texas will slot in here as the SEC title loser. I think it'll be a really complicated situation, but I'm going to have Texas at 5. Facing Tulane, they get them on their home turf. I think they dominate this game. It'll be not quite as, or a little bit more aggressive, frankly, than I think the Clemson game was a year ago for Texas, but I do think Texas gets this win over Tulane. They move on to the next round. Then you have a Notre Dame against Oregon game. Oregon fits in here at the 11 seed. I think they're going to be the team that makes everyone mad. I think at the end of the year, they're going to play Washington. I have Washington winning that game right now, and I think they're going to fall to 10-2. And everyone's going to lose their minds. I think there's going to be an Arizona State team over in the Big 12 that feels like they deserve to be in after losing to Utah in the Big 12 championship. I think you're going to have a team over maybe in the ACC, a Georgia Tech team that maybe is 10-3 at the time with 2 losses to Clemson and 1 loss to Georgia and saying, we absolutely deserve to be in this thing. I think there's going to be a number of teams, maybe a Florida team or an Oklahoma team that's 9-3 in the SEC. I think there's going to be a lot of teams that have an argument for that last spot. I think a 10-2 Oregon wins those arguments in a lot of respects. So I'm going to go with Oregon in that spot. I'm not huge on the Ducks this year, but I think they find their way into the field as the 11 seed and make a lot of people mad in the process. I'll just leave it at that for the time being. That's the one that I fought myself a ton on. There were a ton of different teams that I slotted into that 11 spot, but I'm going to go with Oregon to have a really solid year with a couple of big-time mistakes, and I think at the end of the day, they slot into 11. They play a Notre Dame team at number 6 as far as I'm concerned. I think they're going to suffer 1 loss in the regular season is Notre Dame, but at the end of the day, I think they find their way into the field very comfortably, and I think they play an Oregon team that's going to be really good. I think going up against this back end is going to be really tough for Dante Moore, who's a very talented kid, still going to be very young in his college football career in terms of playing. I think Oregon loses this game to Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame moves on to the next round. Then you have LSU against Washington, a very interesting game. Washington comes down to Baton Rouge to play Brian Kelly and the Tigers. I think LSU takes care of business in this one. And I think LSU is going to be a team that really finds their stride late in the season. Maybe they lose that Alabama game, they lose the Clemson game to start the year, but then around week 7, week 8, maybe a little bit later, they find their stride, the defense really starts playing well, and they become one of those teams that's going to be a nightmare to deal with once you get into the CFP. I think they win this game against Washington. I think Damon Williams has a lot of magic going into this game and just falls a little bit short once you get to this one. But going to be an incredible matchup. Cannot wait for those two. Well, hopefully wait for those two to finally match up at the end of the day. But an incredible matchup in round 1 if we were to get it. I think LSU finds a way to move on. And then Georgia against Utah, another one that I don't think anyone was expecting to see. But in the 12-team playoff, you can see a number of really weird things. Georgia sits where Ohio State did a year ago. I think a team that really was struggling early on in the year, or not even really struggling, but had a couple of moments where they had some hiccups, and then they find their stride, and they become a really tough team to beat. When you have Utah coming to Athens, when you have Kirby Smart in the playoff, I'm going to lean towards Kirby Smart in a lot of respects. So I'm going to go with Georgia here. I think they find their stride late in the season, and I think they move on to the quarters. Well, they'll play a Clemson team that they're very familiar with, at least from last season, that is. But let's get into the quarters here. And we'll start up in the left corner. Clemson against Georgia, 1-8, the same situation that Oregon was in a year ago when Ohio State came to the Rose Bowl and they ended up facing off. It's going to be a weird one. It's a rematch of Week 1 in 2024 where Georgia totally dominated the matchup. I think Clemson's going to be a much better team this year. I also think Georgia just has the physicality that's going to be too much to handle. I think Clemson's a very good football team. I think there is a gap between them and some of the SEC and Big Ten teams when you come down to the trenches. I think Georgia ends up winning that battle. I think they move on to the semifinals. I think they are the 8 seed, much like Ohio State was a year ago, that finds its way to the semifinals and just looks like a buzzsaw doing it. I think Clemson is a very good team. I think Georgia's found their stride by this point, and I think that defensive line is just a nightmare for that offensive line to deal with, and it looks a little bit like that Texas-Clemson game did a year ago. Then you got Alabama-LSU, a rematch from the middle of the season that I think Alabama's probably going to win. I think LSU gets this one. I'll be totally honest with you. I think the LSU defense is going to find a way to develop a ton throughout the season. I think they're going to make a couple of big-time plays here. I think Alabama, while going to be a very good team throughout the year, I think there's going to be a moment where Ty Simpson or this offense being a little bit younger than it normally is, especially at the quarterback position, makes one mistake, makes 1 or 2 mistakes in those big-time moments throughout the season. I think they have big-time moments where they make big-time plays. And then this one, I think they fall a little bit short. I think LSU moves on to the semifinals. As crazy as that sounds, I think this is going to be the team to beat, and I think Alabama is going to really struggle in this matchup. Then you got number 3 Ohio State against number 6 Notre Dame, a national title rematch. I think everyone would love to see this one this upcoming year. I think this one comes down to quarterback play as well, and I think Ohio State has the guy that I feel more confident in, regardless of it's C.J. Carr or Kenny Minchey. I think Notre Dame's fighting an uphill battle at that quarterback position. I think it's going to be really tough to play to the level as some of the other teams will have their quarterbacks playing at. And I think at the end of the day, Ohio State is going to find their groove throughout this season and be a really tough out by the end of it, obviously with them beating Penn State in the Big Ten championship. And Penn State draws the short stick in this scenario. They get Texas, the number 5 seed. I think they lose. I'll be totally honest with you. I think when you look at this Penn State team, they have so many incredible things going for them. I still can't get over when Drew Aller has guys in his face and there's a number of big-time players on the back end. I still think there's going to be those couple of mistakes. I think Drew Aller is going to be a much better player this year and play some really good football and lead them to at least Big Ten title berth for the second year in a row. I think they're going to win some big-time games against Ohio State at home, against Oregon at home. I think they're going to get to this point and they're going to make a couple of mistakes, and this Texas team, especially this defense, is just going to be too much to handle for Drew Aller, for this Penn State offense. I'm going to go with Texas to win this game, and frankly, the Penn State fans get very mad at James Franklin, and we'll see how that develops throughout the offseason. But at the end of the day, I think Penn State's going to be one of those teams that seems to be rolling right along, like kind of like Oregon was a year ago. and then it just falls a little bit short towards the end of the year. They lose to Texas in the quarterfinals, and we got a semifinal of Georgia, LSU, Texas, and Ohio State. You got three SEC teams here, and frankly, I feel a little bit weird about it, but at the end of the day, I do think this is the way it's going to play out, at least as of right now. It's going to be all over the place. I can almost promise you that, but let's start on the left side of the bracket. Number 5 Texas against number 8 Georgia. This will be a rematch of that game that happens in Athens, I believe, later on in the year. November 15th, I believe, is the date on that one, but going to be an incredible matchup. I'm going to take the quarterback that I think has more upside. I'm going to take Arch Manning. I do think Texas wins this game. I think they make the national title for the first time since 2009. I think this team's going to put it together throughout the year. I think the defense is going to be ready to roll right away. I think they're going to be one of the best defenses in the country right away. I think once Arch Manning puts it together, it's going to be a really hard team to stop. They just got news that C.J. Baxter was probably going to play in week 1 and throughout the year. That is huge for this football team, and I think Texas is going to be a really hard out by this time of year. I think they find a way to win this one, even if they lose that one earlier on in the year in Athens. I think they might win that one as well, but at the end of the day, I think Texas wins this game. I think they move on to the national title, and that makes way for Ohio State LSU. This is an incredible matchup. Any time in any iteration of college football, frankly, this is going to be an incredible matchup. I think LSU will do it. As crazy as that sounds, I think when you look at this Ohio State team, there's a million things to like. I think the losses of their 2 coordinators is going to catch up to them at some point. Now, I think they're going to be able to put together a really good year in the meantime. I think Brian Hartline is going to call a really solid offense. I think Matt Patricia is going to find his groove on defense, and they're going to be more than fine. I think there's going to be a moment against an LSU team with a Blake Baker that calls a very exotic, weird defense, and going against a quarterback like Julian Sayin, who will be playing his first CFP games in the first couple of games here. I think LSU finds a way to get this one done. I think they are the team that finds a way to really round in the form late in the year. I think Garrett Nussmeier shines in the CFP, and they find their way to the CFP championship. I think it's Texas against LSU for the national title, as crazy as that might sound right now. I think Texas plays LSU for the national title, an all-SEC national title. I feel as iffy about this pick as I probably would have about just about every single national title pick I would have had. So I don't think this one's as crazy as some people might think it is. I think this college football year is going to be crazy. At the end of it all, I think these 2 teams are going to be incredible. I think Arch Manning and Garrett Nussmeier are going to be 2 of the best quarterbacks in the entire country. I think the defenses will round into form. Now, I don't think Texas really has to, but I think LSU is going to have a ton of firepower on offense. I think Caden Durham's going to kind of come into his own throughout the year and become a very good running back for this team. At the end of the day, I think there is a lot going into this matchup. When I really break it down, when I go into the nitty-gritty, I find my way back to the number 1 team in the country right now. I think the Texas Longhorns win the national title, and it sounds a little bit crazy as I'm saying it because they've been out of that picture for quite some time. They found their way back in the last couple of years, no doubt about it, and then they've fallen short. And it's been partly Sark's fault, partly Quinn Ewers' fault, partly just a number of different things falling the opposite direction for Texas. When I look at this team right now, I see a defense that I think is going to be the very best in the entire country. I see a wide receiver core that, while unproven right now, I think Ryan Wingo is going to become one of the biggest stars in the entire college football world this year. I think Arch Manning rounds into his own around week 3, week 4, and really finds a stride and is incredibly hard to stop. I think this offensive line is going to find its groove throughout the year. I think the run game is going to be a nightmare with C.J. Baxter finding his way back to the field. I think Texas wins its first national title in 20 years. I think they find their way back to the top of the sport. It's going to be a really interesting road. I think you're going to have a number of teams that find their way into this thing. I think you could have a Texas team going into the playoff that maybe didn't even play in the SEC championship and then finds their way through. I think there's so many teams, whether you want to talk about Texas or LSU or an Oregon team up in the Big Ten or maybe even an Arizona State team down in the Big 12, that can find their stride late in the season and find their way to the championship game. I don't know how many can actually win it. I think there's probably 6, 7, maybe 8 teams that can really win the national title. When I break it down and I think about it every which way, I find my way back to Texas just about every time. I think the defense is going to be a nightmare. I think the pass rush is going to get after every single quarterback that they are going to play. And I think Arch Manning is going to be incredible. I don't think he's going to be this Heisman winner that everyone seems to demand that he is in some respects, but I do think he is a guy that's going to put it together. I think the talent is totally undeniable. I think Ryan Wingo is one of the best players in the entire country this year, and we've talked about the defense plenty. I think Colin Simmons is a nightmare, Ethan Burke on the other side as well, Anthony Hill in the middle, and then Michael Taff and all those guys on the back end. I think Texas wins the national title, and I think there's a lot of people that are probably going to make that pick. At the end of the day, they're the number one team in the country for a reason going into this year. I think the defense is going to be as good as you're going to find over really the past couple of years in the college football world, going back maybe to those Georgia teams. I think they're going to be an absolute nightmare defensively, and I'm not going to bet against Arch Manning. I'm just not. I think that player is an incredibly, incredibly talented kid. I think he's going to keep his head down. I think he's not going to get caught up in the noise, and he's going to make a number of big-time plays for this team. So I'm going to go with Texas to win the national title, as weird as that might sound after the probably 15 or 20 years that they've had a little bit down. I think they find their way back to the top of the sport in their 20th anniversary of that 2005 victory with Vince Young. I think Texas wins the national title this year, and I don't feel confident. And I think that's the great thing about this college football season. If anyone tells you that they feel super confident in their college football championship pick, they're probably lying to you or they're lying to themselves. So at the end of the day, it'll be really interesting to watch all of this unfold. I think we're going to have one of the crazier years in recent memory. I think last year was all over the place. I think this year is going to kick it up a notch. And although all of that craziness will happen, I think the number one team at the beginning of the year finds a way to be the number one team at the end of the year, and the Texas Longhorns win the national title. And I'm already talking myself out of it. But at the end of the day, that's what I'm going to go with right now. I will stake my claim on that, and we will see how that develops over the next little bit. But thank you so much for tuning in. Definitely do like, subscribe, comment, do all of that good stuff. Means the world to me. On Wednesday, we'll get into all of the fall camp stuff you need to know, a number of quarterbacks being named all around the country. We will get into all of that stuff. We will preview Farmageddon this upcoming weekend. We'll get into Iowa State, Kansas State, a huge game in the Big 12 to kick off week 0. We'll get into all the craziness. There is going to be a number of things to break down before this thing kicks off in just 5 days here. So cannot wait for this thing to get going. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please like, comment, subscribe, do all of that good stuff. Means the world to me. But I'll go with Texas Longhorns to win the national title, and we'll see how that develops throughout the year. But thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday.